We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening aren't subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 20,000 subscribers, so please be a legend and smash the subscribe button. And like this video, it will really help support us. Thank you so much.
I never thought I'd have a Tinder horror story, but here we are. It all started on a regular Tuesday evening when I was swiping through profiles, bored and lonely. That's when I came across this guy's profile. He had a bunch of pictures, all a bit blurry but still attractive enough for me to swipe right. We matched almost instantly, and I felt that little spark of excitement you get when you connect with someone new. We started chatting, and he seemed pretty cool. He was funny, had interesting things to say, and we seemed to click. After a few days of messaging back and forth, he suggested meeting up. I was feeling it, so I agreed to grab coffee that weekend. It felt like a safe, casual first date option. The day before our date, I went to check his profile again, just to refresh my memory on what he looked like. But when I opened Tinder, all his photos were gone. It was just an empty gray silhouette where his pictures used to be. I thought it was weird, but figured it was probably just some app glitch. I didn't worry too much about it since we'd already made plans and exchanged numbers. Saturday came, and I headed to the coffee shop we'd agreed on. I was a little nervous, as you always are before a first date, but mostly excited. When I got there, I spotted a guy sitting by the window who seemed to be looking around expectantly. As I walked over, something felt off. His face didn't quite match what I remembered from his photos. It was like looking at someone wearing a mask, trying to look familiar, but not quite pulling it off. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was different, but it gave me the creeps. His eyes seemed a different color. His jawline was sharper than I remembered, and his hair was styled differently. It wasn't like he had used old photos or anything. It was like he was a completely different person trying to pass as the guy I'd seen in the pictures. I tried to shake off the feeling during our date. We talked about normal stuff, work, hobbies, favorite movies, that kind of thing. But I couldn't get rid of this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The way he talked and acted didn't match the person I'd been messaging. It felt like I was sitting across from a totally different guy. His mannerisms were off too. He'd laugh at odd moments or stare at me a bit too intensely when I was speaking. There were long, uncomfortable pauses in the conversation that hadn't been there when we were chatting online. I started to feel really uneasy, like I was in some kind of twisted social experiment. I started making up excuses to leave early. Instead, I had a work emergency and had to go. He seemed disappointed but didn't push it. I practically ran out of that coffee shop, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The whole way home, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. As soon as I got home, I blocked him on Tinder and deleted his number from my phone. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was so wrong. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from new accounts on Tinder. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I noticed they all had similar opening lines, asking why I blocked them. It didn't take long to realize it was the same guy making fake profiles to try and contact me. I kept ignoring and blocking these accounts, hoping he'd eventually give up, but he just kept making new ones. It got to the point where I was scared to open the app, dreading what I'd find. Each time I saw a new message, my heart would race, and I'd feel this cold dread wash over me. This whole thing had me feeling paranoid and scared. I started second-guessing every match and conversation I had on dating apps. Was the person I was talking to really who they said they were? Were their photos actually them? It made me realize how vulnerable we can be when meeting people online. I took a break from dating apps after that. The whole experience made me appreciate the importance of trusting my gut and putting my safety first. I became way more cautious about meeting people in person and always made sure to tell a friend where I was going and who I was meeting. I started doing more background checks on people I matched with. I'd look them up on social media, try to verify their identity before agreeing to meet. It felt a bit stalkerish, but after what happened, I felt it was necessary. The experience also made me more aware of my surroundings. I'd catch myself scanning coffee shops and restaurants, looking for anyone who might be watching me. I started varying my routines, taking different routes to work, changing up where I'd go for lunch. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I talked to some of my friends about what happened, and it turned out a couple of them had similar experiences. One friend told me about a guy who'd used someone else's photos on his profile. Another had met up with someone who looked nothing like their pictures. It made me realize how common these kinds of deceptions can be in online dating. I never thought I'd end up in a Tinder horror story, but here I am. It all started when I was on a work trip to Boston. Bored in my hotel room one night, I decided to swipe through Tinder, thinking maybe I'd find someone interesting to grab a drink with. That's when I matched with Jake. His profile looked great. Cute photos, witty bio, the works. We started chatting and really hit it off. After messaging back and forth for a bit, he suggested meeting up that evening. I was hesitant at first about meeting a stranger in an unfamiliar city, but Jake seemed so charming and we had such good banter, I figured why not. When I asked about good bars in the area, though, he said he wasn't too familiar with Boston either. He suggested just hanging out at his place instead. Red flag number one, right? Meeting at a stranger's apartment isn't exactly dating safety 101, but Jake was so disarming about it. He said he just moved to the city for work too and hadn't had a chance to explore much yet. He offered to order takeout and promised his place had an amazing view of the skyline. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Jake sent over his address. It was in a really nice part of town, which made me feel a little better. When I got there, I was blown away. The building was gorgeous, all sleek and modern. Jake buzzed me up to the 20th floor. As soon as he opened the door, I was stunned. The apartment was absolutely beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows with an incredible city view, just like he'd said. Stylish furniture, tasteful artwork on the walls. It looked like something out of a magazine spread. Jake greeted me with a warm smile and invited me in. He offered me a glass of wine as we chatted and got to know each other. Everything was going great at first. Jake was just as charming in person as he'd been while messaging. We had an easy rapport and lots to talk about. But as the evening went on, I started noticing little things that felt off. The apartment was impeccably clean and organized, almost too perfect. There were no personal touches anywhere, no photos, no knickknacks, nothing that suggested someone actually lived there. I casually asked how long he'd been in Boston. Jake said he moved a couple weeks ago for a new job. That explained the lack of personal items, I guess, but something still nagged at me. The whole place had a stage feel to it, like a model home or a hotel suite. I got up to use the bathroom at one point. The towels were perfectly folded, toiletries arranged just so. The medicine cabinet was completely empty. Who doesn't have at least a bottle of Advil or some Band-Aids? Back in the living room, I noticed there were no coasters on the coffee table. The remotes were lined up with military precision. The throw pillows looked like they'd never been sat on. It was all so pristine. My unease grew as the night went on. I started asking more pointed questions about Jake's move and his job. His answers got increasingly vague. He changed the subject or deflected with a joke. Finally, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I straight up asked Jake if this was really his apartment. His demeanor changed instantly. The easygoing charm vanished, replaced by a cold, hard look in his eyes. He got defensive, saying of course it was his place. Why would I even ask that? I backpedaled, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was done. The relaxed vibe from earlier was gone. Jake's whole energy had shifted. He seemed agitated, almost angry. I knew I needed to get out of there. I made up an excuse about an early meeting the next day and said I should head out. Jake's mood swings were freaking me out. One minute he was trying to convince me to stay. The next he could barely look at me. I grabbed my purse and practically ran out the door. Once I was safely back at my hotel, I did some digging online. It didn't take long to find the apartment listed on Airbnb. The photos matched exactly, same furniture, same artwork, same everything. According to the listing, it had been available for rent for months. My blood ran cold as I realized what had happened. Jake had used a short-term rental to create a fake persona. He'd lured me there under false pretenses. Who knows what his real intentions were? I've reported the incident to Tinder and warned some local women's groups about the scam, but I couldn't shake how close I'd come to real danger. I'd ignored so many red flags because Jake seemed so nice at first. The experience shook me. I deleted Tinder and swore off online dating for a while. Even now, months later, I'm still much more cautious about meeting strangers. That night could have ended so much worse. I don't want to scare people away from dating apps entirely. I know plenty of people who've had great experiences. But my brush with Jake was a stark reminder that you can never be too careful. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Photos showcase her adventures around the world, from skydiving in New Zealand to volunteering in Thailand. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I swiped right. To my shock, we matched almost instantly. We hit it off right away in our messages. She was funny, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in me. After a few days of back and forth, she suggested meeting up for drinks. I was thrilled but also a bit suspicious. It all seemed too good to be true. When I expressed some hesitation, she offered to video chat. We had a quick call and she looked just like her photos. My doubts faded and I agreed to meet her at a trendy bar downtown that weekend. As I walked into the bar that Saturday night, my nerves were on fire. I spotted her immediately. She was even more gorgeous in person. She greeted me with a warm hug and a dazzling smile that made my heart race. We grabbed drinks and found a cozy booth. The conversation flowed effortlessly. She was charming, witty, and seemed fascinated by everything I said. Hours flew by in what felt like minutes. After several rounds, we were both feeling pretty tipsy and decided to head out. As we walked down the street, she started asking more personal questions. At first, it was just casual stuff about my job and hobbies. But then she began pressing for specifics, my salary, my car, where I lived. In my buzz state, it didn't register as weird. I thought she was just getting to know me better. At a street corner, she suggested we go back to her place for a nightcap. Caught up in the excitement, I eagerly agreed. We took a short Uber ride to her apartment building in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. As soon as we entered her unit, something felt off. The place was nearly empty, just a couch, coffee table, and TV in the living room. No personal touches or decorations anywhere. She casually mentioned she had just moved in, and I brushed off my unease. We sat on the couch, and she poured us both a glass of wine. As we sipped, her questions became even more probing, asking about my family, my bank, even my social security number. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. That's when she hit me with an odd request. She said she was having some financial troubles and asked if I could wire her some money to hold onto for a few days. She promised to pay me back with interest. At this point, all the red flags came into sharp focus. I made up an excuse about feeling sick and needing to leave. She tried to convince me to stay, but I hurried out of there as fast as I could. Once outside, I realized I had no idea where I was. My phone was dead, and the streets were eerily quiet. I started walking, hoping to find a main road or open business where I could call a cab. After a few blocks, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw a man following me. My heart raced as I picked up my pace. The footsteps got faster too. I broke into a run, ducking down alleys and side streets, trying to lose him. I finally spotted a 24-hour diner and burst through the doors, out of breath and panicked. The confused staff let me use their phone to call a cab. As I waited, I kept watching the door, terrified the man would come in. The cab finally arrived, and I made it home safely. But my ordeal wasn't over. The next morning, I got a call from my bank about suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to access it remotely multiple times. I froze as I realized what had happened. She must have somehow gotten my information during our date. I filed reports with the bank and police, but her Tinder profile had vanished without a trace. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. I got calls from unknown numbers at all hours. My email was flooded with spam. One night, I could have sworn I saw someone watching my apartment from across the street. Paranoia set in. I changed all my passwords, froze my credit, and even considered moving. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched or followed. A week after the date, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My hands shook as I pushed it open. Inside, nothing seemed out of place at first. Then I noticed my laptop was missing, along with some personal documents. I called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry. As I was talking to the officers, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thanks for the lovely evening. See you again soon. My blood ran cold. I showed the officers, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt helpless and terrified. The next day, I received an email with photos of me, entering my office, getting coffee, even sleeping in my bed. The message simply said, "We're not done yet." I went to the police again, desperate for help. They took my statement but warned me that these cases were often hard to prove or prosecute. They suggested I lay low for a while, maybe stay with a friend. That night, as I was packing a bag to leave town, my power suddenly cut out. In the darkness, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart pounded as I approached, phone in hand ready to call 911. I peered through the peephole and saw nothing. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. The hall was empty except for a small package on the ground. With shaking hands, I picked it up and brought it inside. I carefully opened the package to find a single red rose and a note. The game is just beginning. I can't wait to see you again. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. What started as an innocent Tinder date had turned into a nightmare with no end in sight. As I sat in the darkness, clutching the chilling note, I wondered how I would ever feel safe again. I never thought I'd be the guy with a Tinder horror story, but here I am. It all started out a regular Tuesday evening when I was swiping through profiles, bored and hoping to maybe meet someone interesting. That's when I came across Sally's profile. She seemed cute and fun with pictures of her hiking and traveling. Her bio mentioned loving adventure and trying new restaurants, which sounded perfect to me. We matched and started chatting. The conversation flowed easily, and Sally seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of messaging back and forth, we decided to meet up for dinner at a new Italian place downtown. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. When Sally walked in, I was relieved to see she looked just like her photos. She greeted me with a warm smile and a hug, and we sat down to look at the menu. As we ordered our food and started talking, I felt myself relaxing. Sally was funny and engaging, asking me questions about my job and hobbies. She told me about her work as a freelance graphic designer and her love for outdoor activities. The conversation never felt forced or awkward, and I found myself really enjoying her company. Our food arrived, and we continued chatting between bites. Sally complimented the restaurant choice and suggested we should try out a new hiking trail together sometime. I was thrilled at the prospect of a second date and eagerly agreed. As we finished our meals, Sally excused herself to use the restroom. When she returned, she seemed a bit flustered and said she'd accidentally left her phone in my car when I picked her up earlier. She asked if she could grab my keys to retrieve it quickly. Without hesitation, I handed over my keys. Sally thanked me and said she'd be right back. I waited at the table, feeling pretty good about how the evening was going. A few minutes passed, and I started to wonder what was taking so long. I figured maybe she was making a quick call or checking her messages. After about 10 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. I decided to step outside and check on her. As I walked out of the restaurant, my stomach dropped. My car was gone, and so was Sally. At first, I thought there must be some mistake. Maybe I'd forgotten where I parked. But as reality set in, I realized what had happened. Sally had stolen my car. In a panic, I called the police and reported the theft. They took my statement and said they'd be on the lookout for my vehicle. I felt like such an idiot for falling for her act and handing over my keys so easily. The next few days were a blur of dealing with insurance, talking to detectives, and trying to piece together what had happened. It turned out that Sally wasn't her real name, and the profile I had matched with was fake. The police told me she was likely part of an organized theft ring that used dating apps to target unsuspecting victims. I learned that these scammers create convincing profiles and chat with their matches for days or even weeks to build trust. They choose their targets carefully, looking for people who seem financially stable and likely to own valuable cars. Then they set up dates and use various tactics to get their victims' keys. In my case, the whole evening had been a setup. Sally's friendly demeanor, her interest in me, and even her suggestion for a second date were all part of the act. She'd probably been scanning the parking lot for my car while I was waiting inside the restaurant. A week after the incident, I got a call from the police. They found my car abandoned in a parking lot about 50 miles away. When I went to retrieve it, my heart sank. The car was a mess. The stereo had been ripped out, the seats were slashed, and it looked like they'd tried to strip it for parts. As I was dealing with the aftermath, I got another surprise. A guy reached out to me through a mutual friend on Facebook. He'd seen my post about the stolen car and realized he'd been on a date with the same woman just a few days before me. In his case, she'd asked to borrow his phone to make a call and then ran off with it. We met for a coffee to compare notes, and it was eerie how similar our experiences were. Same story about being a graphic designer, same suggestions for future dates, even the same excuse about forgetting something in the car. It made me realize how calculated and practiced this whole scam was. The police were interested in our connection and asked us both to come in and look at some photos. They had a whole board of suspected members of this theft ring. We both recognized Sally, but under a different name. Turns out she'd been arrested before for similar scams in other states. Over the next few weeks, I heard from a few more guys who'd had run-ins with Sally or her accomplices. It seemed like they'd been operating in our area for months, leaving a trail of stolen cars and broken trust behind them. The whole experience left me feeling paranoid and unsure of myself. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, wondering how I could have been so blind. But talking to the other victims helped me realize it wasn't just me. These scammers were professionals, and they knew exactly how to manipulate people. About a month after the theft, I got another call from the detective assigned to my case. They'd made a breakthrough. One of Sally's accomplices had been caught trying to sell stolen car parts, and he'd agreed to turn on the rest of the group in exchange for a lighter sentence. The detective asked me to come down to the station to identify the suspects they'd rounded up. Walking into that room and seeing Sally sitting there in handcuffs was surreal. She looked so different from the charming woman I'd met. Cold, angry, and defiant. As I left the station that day, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that she'd been caught, anger at what she'd put me and others through, and a lingering sense of disbelief that it had all really happened. I'd been swiping on Tinder for months, matching with a few people here and there, but never really clicking with anyone. Then I came across Sarah's profile. She was gorgeous blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that lit up her whole face. Her bio was clever and funny, mentioning her love for hiking and obscure 80s movies. I swiped right without hesitation. To my surprise, we matched almost instantly. I sent her a message making a joke about one of the movies she mentioned. She replied quickly, and just like that, we were off. For the next few weeks, Sarah and I talked constantly. We messaged throughout the day and often stayed up late into the night, chatting about everything and nothing. We had so much in common, similar tastes in music, books, and food. We even discovered we'd grown up just a few towns apart. The more we talked, the more I liked her. Sarah was smart and witty, always ready with a clever comeback or an insightful comment. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking thoughtful questions about my job and my family. I found myself looking forward to her messages, checking my phone more often than I'd like to admit. After about a month of nonstop chatting, I suggested we meet up. Sarah hesitated at first, saying she was nervous about meeting in person. I understood. I was a bit anxious too. But after a few days, she agreed. We decided to meet at a coffee shop downtown on Saturday afternoon. I spent way too long getting ready that morning, changing my shirt 3 times and fussing with my hair. I wanted everything to be perfect. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the window so I could see Sarah approach. As I waited, I scrolled through our chat history, smiling at some of the jokes we'd shared. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up eagerly. A woman walked in, glancing around the cafe. My smile faded as I realized it wasn't Sarah. This woman was brunette, heavier set, and at least a decade older than the woman in Sarah's photos. I turned back to my phone, figuring it must be another customer. But then I heard a hesitant voice say my name. I looked up again, and the woman was standing by my table, an uncomfortable smile on her face. Confusion washed over me. Had I somehow mixed up the meeting place? But no, this woman knew my name. A sick feeling started to grow in my stomach as I realized what was happening. The woman sat down across from me, avoiding eye contact. In a quiet voice, she explained that she was the one I'd been talking to all this time. She'd used photos of her younger sister to create the profile. I sat there in stunned silence as she continued talking. She said she'd started doing this because she was lonely and had trouble meeting people. At first, it was just for conversation, but then she connected with me and couldn't bring herself to come clean. As she spoke, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disappointment, embarrassment. All those weeks of great conversation suddenly felt tainted. I'd opened up to this person, shared personal stories and feelings, and it had all been based on a lie. The woman, she never did tell me her real name, kept apologizing, saying she never meant for it to go this far. She genuinely enjoyed our chats and felt that we had a real connection. But as she spoke, I found it hard to believe anything she said. I cut her off mid-sentence, telling her I needed to leave. I couldn't sit there any longer, listening to her excuses. As I stood up to go, she reached out as if to stop me, but then thought better of it and pulled her hand back. I walked out of the cafe in a daze, barely registering my surroundings. The beautiful spring day that had seemed so full of promise earlier now felt mocking. I wandered aimlessly for a while, trying to process what had just happened. As I walked, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah's account. The woman was apologizing again, begging me to hear her out. I ignored it and kept walking. But then another message came through. This one stopped me in my tracks. It was a photo, a screenshot of a conversation. In it, the woman was talking to someone else, planning something. My blood ran cold as I read the messages. This wasn't just about a lonely woman looking for connection. It was a scam. The woman had been working with others, luring men into meeting up, and then what? I didn't know, but the messages hinted at something sinister. My mind raced. How many other men had fallen for this? What would have happened if I'd agreed to meet somewhere more private? I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned around and started walking back to the cafe, but it was too late. The woman was gone. I asked the barista if he'd seen where she went, but he just shrugged, uninterested. Over the next few days, I did some digging. I reverse image searched the photos from Sarah's profile and found the real woman, Sarah's sister. She lived across the country and had no idea her photos were being used like this. I reported the profile to Tinder, but I knew that was just a drop in the bucket. How many other fake profiles were out there, luring unsuspecting people into who knows what? I considered going to the police, but what could I tell them? I had no real name, no way to identify the woman. Just a fake profile and some screenshots that proved nothing. A week after the incident, I received another message from an unknown number. It was a warning telling me to stop looking into things if I knew what was good for me. I deleted the message, but the uneasy feeling remained. I found myself jumping at shadows, always looking over my shoulder. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart raced. Was it her again? Or was someone else involved in the scam? I guess I may always live with this fear. I've been swiping on Tinder for months, matching with a few people here and there, but never really clicking with anyone. Then I came across Sarah's profile. She was gorgeous, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that lit up her whole face. Her bio was clever and funny, mentioning her love for hiking and obscure 80s movies. I swiped right without hesitation. To my surprise, we matched almost instantly. I sent her a message making a joke about one of the movies she mentioned. She replied quickly, and just like that, we were off. For the next few weeks, Sarah and I talked constantly. We messaged throughout the day and often stayed up late into the night, chatting about everything and nothing. We had so much in common, similar tastes in music, books, and food. We even discovered we'd grown up just a few towns apart. The more we talked, the more I liked her. Sarah was smart and witty, always ready with a clever comeback or an insightful comment. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking thoughtful questions about my job and my family. I found myself looking forward to her messages, checking my phone more often than I'd like to admit. After about a month of nonstop chatting, I suggested we meet up. Sarah hesitated at first, saying she was nervous about meeting in person. I understood. I was a bit anxious too. But after a few days, she agreed. We decided to meet at a coffee shop downtown on Saturday afternoon. I spent way too long getting ready that morning, changing my shirt 3 times and fussing with my hair. I wanted everything to be perfect. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the window so I could see Sarah approach. As I waited, I scrolled through our chat history, smiling at some of the jokes we'd shared. The bell of the door chimed, and I looked up eagerly. A woman walked in, glancing around the cafe. My smile faded as I realized it wasn't Sarah. This woman was brunette, heavier set, and at least a decade older than the woman in Sarah's photos. I turned back to my phone, figuring it must be another customer, but then I heard a hesitant voice say my name. I looked up again, and the woman was standing by my table, an uncomfortable smile on her face. Confusion washed over me. Had I somehow mixed up the meeting place? But no, this woman knew my name. A sick feeling started to grow in my stomach as I realized what was happening. The woman sat down across from me, avoiding eye contact. In a quiet voice, she explained that she was the one I'd been talking to all this time. She'd used photos of her younger sister to create the profile. I sat there in stunned silence as she continued talking. She said she'd started doing this because she was lonely and had trouble meeting people. At first, it was just for conversation, but then she connected with me and couldn't bring herself to come clean. As she spoke, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disappointment, embarrassment. All those weeks of great conversation suddenly felt tainted. I'd opened up to this person, shared personal stories and feelings, and it had all been based on a lie. The woman, she never did tell me her real name, kept apologizing, saying she never meant for it to go this far. She genuinely enjoyed our chats and felt that we had a real connection. But as she spoke, I found it hard to believe anything she said. I cut her off mid-sentence, telling her I needed to leave. I couldn't sit there any longer listening to her excuses. As I stood up to go, she reached out as if to stop me, but then thought better of it and pulled her hand back. I walked out of the cafe in a daze, barely registering my surroundings. The beautiful spring day that had seemed so full of promise earlier now felt mocking. I wandered aimlessly for a while, trying to process what had just happened. As I walked, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah's account. The woman was apologizing again, begging me to hear her out. I ignored it and kept walking. But then another message came through. This one stopped me in my tracks. It was a photo, a screenshot of a conversation. In it, the woman was talking to someone else, planning something. My blood ran cold as I read the messages. This wasn't just about a lonely woman looking for connection. It was a scam. The woman had been working with others, luring men into meeting up, and then what? I didn't know, but the messages hinted at something sinister. My mind raced. How many other men had fallen for this? What would have happened if I'd agreed to meet somewhere more private? I felt the chill run down my spine. I turned around and started walking back to the cafe, but it was too late. The woman was gone. I asked the barista if he'd seen where she went, but he just shrugged, uninterested. Over the next few days, I did some digging. I reversed image searched the photos from Sarah's profile and found the real woman, Sarah's sister. She lived across the country and had no idea her photos were being used like this. I reported the profile to Tinder, but I knew that was just a drop in the bucket. How many other fake profiles were out there, luring unsuspecting people into who knows what? I considered going to the police, but what could I tell them? I had no real name, no way to identify the woman, just a fake profile and some screenshots that proved nothing. A week after the incident, I received another message from an unknown number. It was a warning telling me to stop looking into things if I knew what was good for me. I deleted the message, but the uneasy feeling remained. I found myself jumping at shadows, always looking over my shoulder. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart raced. Was it her again? Or someone else involved in the scam? Weeks passed, and slowly, the fear began to fade. But the experience left its mark. I deleted Tinder and all my other dating apps. The thought of putting myself out there again, of potentially falling for another scam, was too much. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Sometimes when I was out in public, I'd catch a glimpse of someone who looked like the woman from the cafe. It was never her, of course, but it always set my heart racing. I never expected my Tinder experience to turn into a nightmare. It all started with Jake, charming, witty, and seemingly perfect. Our messages clicked instantly, and after a few days of chatting, we decided to meet for coffee. The first date was magical. Jake was even better in person. Attentive, funny, and we had so much in common. Hours flew by as we talked and laughed. When he suggested continuing the evening at my place, I hesitated briefly but pushed aside my usual caution. This guy felt different, special. As soon as we entered my apartment, Jake pulled me close and kissed me passionately. The excitement was building until I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my leg. I yelped and jumped back, looking down to see Jake's cat lashed onto my calf, claws digging in. Jake apologized, quickly putting the cat in another room and helping me clean the scratches. We tried to recapture the mood, but I started feeling a tightness in my chest. At first, I thought it was just nerves, but breathing soon became difficult. Panic set in as I realized I was having an asthma attack, something I hadn't experienced in years. I fumbled for my inhaler, grateful I still kept it in my purse out of habit. Jake seemed more amused than concerned, chuckling as I wheezed and puffed on my inhaler. "Wow, you really are sensitive, Pa," he said with a smirk. His cavalier attitude was off-putting, but I chalked it up to nervousness or not understanding asthma's severity. Once I caught my breath, Jake tried to pick up where we left off. But the mood was gone for me. I politely suggested we call it a night, and he left without much fuss. I thought that would be the end of it, just an awkward first date story. The next day, things took a turn. Jake texted me, not to check if I was okay, but to share graphic sexual fantasies. Taken aback, I tried steering the conversation to neutral ground. He didn't take the hint and kept pushing, describing in detail what he wanted to do to me. I finally told him directly that I wasn't comfortable with that kind of talk so soon. He backed off briefly, apologizing and claiming he got carried away. We chatted more casually for a few days, and I started to think it had just been a misstep. Then the picture started. At first, just shirtless gym selfies. Not my thing, but harmless enough. But they quickly escalated to full-on nudes and close-ups of the genitals. I told him firmly to stop, that I wasn't interested in that kind of exchange. He'd apologized and send more a few days later. I blocked his number, thinking that would end it. But he found me on every social media platform, creating new accounts when I blocked those too. His messages ranged from angry rants about me being a tease to more unsolicited photos to please for another chance. Weeks turned into months, and Jake's messages kept coming. He'd go quiet for a while, lulling me into thinking he'd given up, only to pop up again with a new barrage of texts or DMs. Sometimes he referenced things I posted, making it clear he was still keeping tabs on me online. I started feeling paranoid everywhere I went. Was that in my glimpsed across the street? Did I just hear his voice in the grocery store? I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at small noises. One day, I noticed a car parked across from my apartment. It was there when I left for work and still there when I returned. The next day, the same car was following me on my morning run. My heart raced as I took a complicated route home, trying to lose it. I started varying my routines, taking different routes to work, and changing up my usual coffee shops and grocery stores. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My friends noticed my increasing anxiety and urged me to go to the police, but I hesitated, unsure if I had enough evidence. The final straw came when I got home one day to find an envelope stuffed in my mailbox. Inside was a handful of printed photos, all of me, going about my daily life. Getting coffee, walking to work, out with friends, and a note. I'm always watching. Shaking, I called my best friend, who came over immediately. We went through all the messages, photos, and incidents I'd experienced over the past months. Seeing it all laid out, I realized how serious the situation had become. My friend insisted on staying with me that night, and in the morning we went straight to the police station. The officers took my statement seriously, reviewing all the evidence I gathered. They helped me file for a restraining order and gave me advice on increasing my home security. They also suggested I reach out to Tinder and other social media platforms to report Jake's behavior. In the following weeks, I threw myself into reclaiming my sense of safety. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and took a self-defense class. I went through all my social media accounts, tightening privacy settings and being more mindful of what I shared online. The restraining order seemed to work for a while. Jake's messages and sightings stopped, and I started to relax. But just as I thought it was over, I received a bouquet of flowers at work. The card read, "I'm not giving up on us." My stomach dropped as I recognized Jake's handwriting. I reported the incident to the police, who said they'd investigate but couldn't do much unless he directly violated the restraining order. Frustrated and scared, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached out to a private investigator, hoping to gather more evidence of Jake's stalking. The PI discovered Jake had a history of similar behavior with other women. Armed with this information, I went back to the police. This time they took more aggressive action, arresting Jake for multiple violations of restraining orders. As Jake faced legal consequences, I slowly began to feel safer, but the experience had changed me. I was more cautious, more aware of potential dangers lurking behind charming smiles and witty messages. Months later, I found myself hesitantly downloading Tinder again. As I crafted my new profile, I paused, wondering if I was ready. Then I smiled, realizing that while Jake had shaken my trust, he hadn't broken my spirit. I was stronger now, wiser, and ready to take on the world of dating again. This time with my eyes wide open and my boundaries firmly in place. So I matched with this guy Darren on Tinder. His profile seemed normal, 28 into hiking and craft beer. We chatted for a few days and decided to meet for coffee. The date itself was pretty meh. Darren was quiet, kind of awkward. We made small talk about work and hobbies. Nothing exciting, but no major red flags either. After an hour, I said I needed to head home. Darren offered to walk me in my car, but I said no thanks. I figured that was that, just another forgettable Tinder meetup. But things got weird that night. I was chilling at home, binge watching Netflix, when I heard a strange noise from downstairs. At first, I ignored it. Old houses make weird sounds, right? But then I heard it again, a definite thump from the basement. My heart started racing. I muted the TV and listened. For a few minutes, nothing. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps. I was freaking out. Should I go check? Call someone. I texted my roommate who was out, but no response. The noises kept going on and off for like an hour. I was too scared to investigate. Finally, I called the cops. Felt kinda dumb reporting mysterious sounds, but the dispatcher said they'd send someone over. About 15 minutes later, 2 cops showed up. They searched the whole house, including the basement. At first, they didn't find anything weird, but then one of them noticed some scrape marks on the basement floor. They moved some boxes and found the beginnings of a large metal cage being built in the corner. I nearly threw up. Who would be making a cage in my basement? And why? The cops asked if I had any work done or given anyone access to my place recently. That's when it hit me. Darren from the coffee date. He'd asked about where I lived during our chat. I didn't give my exact address, but I mentioned the neighborhood. The police took my statement and gathered evidence from the basement. They said they'd increase patrols and follow up. I was too freaked out to stay there alone, so I crashed at a friend's place. The next day, the cops told me they'd identified and arrested Darren based on our Tinder messages and security footage from my area. Turns out he had a history of stalking and had just gotten out of prison. He confessed to breaking into my house planning to kidnap me. I was horrified. If I hadn't heard those noises and called the cops, who knows what would have happened. It was pure luck that I caught on before it was too late. In the following weeks, I was a mess. Jumpy, paranoid, couldn't sleep. I installed a security system and was on edge at every little sound. Deleted Tinder and swore off online dating. It took forever to feel safe in my own home again. Looking back, there were signs I missed. Darren asking lots of questions about where I lived and my schedule. His insistence on walking me in my car. But at the time, it all seemed so normal. I never imagined a casual coffee date could turn into something so terrifying. As the investigation continued, more creepy details emerged. The cops found Darren's journal, which detailed his plans for me. He'd been watching my house for days, learning my routine. The cage was just the beginning. He had a whole kidnapping kit hidden in his car. Rope, duct tape, sedatives. It was like something out of a horror movie. They'd also discovered he'd done this before. There were 2 other women he'd stalked after meeting them online. Luckily, he hadn't managed to abduct them, but it was clear I wasn't his first target. The trial was a nightmare. Having to face Darren in court relived the whole experience. But his confession and all the evidence meant a quick conviction. He got 20 years for attempted kidnapping and breaking and entering. It was a relief knowing he'd be locked up for a long time. Recovery was a slow process. I went to therapy and joined a support group for survivors of stalking. Slowly, I started to feel more like myself again. I moved to a new apartment, one with better security. Started hanging out with friends again, even went on a few dates, vetted by said friends, of course. But I'll never forget how quickly an ordinary day turned into a nightmare. That unfinished cage in my basement will haunt me forever. I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard those noises that night. Would Darren have finished building it? Would he have managed to trap me inside? The whole experience changed how I approach meeting new people. I'm way more cautious now about what I share, who I trust. But I'm trying not to let fear control my life. I know not everyone out there is dangerous, but it's important to stay alert. One unexpected outcome of all this, I've become weirdly fascinated with true crime. Not in a morbid way, but more like studying it to understand the psychology behind it. Why do people do these things? How can we better protect ourselves? I've even thought about going back to school for criminology. It's been over a year now, and life is mostly back to normal. But I'll never take my safety for granted again. I'm more aware of my surroundings, trust my instincts, and always have a plan B. And yeah, I still check my basement regularly, just in case. So that's my crazy Tinder tale. From coffee date to almost kidnapping in 24 hours. If there's a lesson here, it's probably trust your gut and maybe don't tell strangers where you live. Oh, and always check your basement for mysterious cages. You never know.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.